I remember getting a text from him. Hey, my plans have changed. I'm coming in tonight. Would you be able to pick me up from the airport? Simple request, right? No emotional hooks, just, hey, are you available to pick me up? I went into crisis. I was in absolute breakdown because, the war inside of me was saying, well, gosh, I really don't want to drive to the airport tonight. I really, I've planned this self-care night for myself. And I might just be sitting on the couch and watching Netflix, but still, that is a commitment that I've made to myself. While on the other hand, inside of me, there's this just paralyzing pull towards not disappointing and not inconveniencing. I narrowed it down to these two things that drive my personal pleasing patterns. And
you're listening to the Woman of Value podcast. You are about to hear the story of a woman who is following her dreams and passions and creating positive change in the world. My guest today is Bex Burton. She helps independent women attract and grow lasting love without sacrificing who they are or what they want out of life. Over the last decade, she has committed to the study and growth of lasting love within herself and in her union with her beloved. And she has a couple of signature programs, Your Majesty and Core Joy Living, where she helps other independent women do the same thing. She inspires deeply transformational experiences through movement, mindfulness, and meditation via live and online programs, spectacle dance performances, and nature-immersive glamping retreats, which are all so cool. And Bex is an incredible dancer and hula hooper, and I had her on my other podcast, and I just thought she is a woman of value, and she would be a great addition to this podcast. So welcome.
Thank you, Sandy. It's so great to be here and chat with you and your audience today.
Let's jump into what I ask everybody right away, which is, what does woman of value mean to you?
Oh, what a great question. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, wow, this could go in so many directions. But, the thing that comes up for me, first and foremost, a woman of value is self-aware. She has and that might sound like a sort of a loose term or a general term, but a woman of value, being self-aware, has a recognition of herself in a number of different scenarios, in a number of different capacities. Not only do we know ourself and our, the ways that we identify, the ways that we like to be perceived, or the career path that we've chosen, or the hobbies that we spend our time, or even if you're a parent and you might identify as a mother or another family member, right? Not just those external awarenesses, but also the deeper awarenesses of what our emotional experience is like, what our programming and I'll say wounding might be from our early childhood experience, our family of origin experience. So a woman of value has a depth and a breadth of self-awareness that spans from the external to the deeper internal, where she's able to communicate the things that are important to her, like her feelings, like her desires, her needs. She's able to even unskillfully command language and express these things to other people, whether those be romantic relationships or other relationships in her life. And she's able to express boundaries and use the word no when it's applicable, to not only protect herself and her own well-being, but to really ensure that her highest needs are prioritized and expressed and honored. So I think a woman of value is really just a woman who takes the time to reflect internally, work with helping professionals to know herself on deep, intimate, and vulnerable levels, and take that knowledge and integrate those principles and that awareness into how she shows up in daily life.
That's so comprehensive and so in alignment with everything that I believe and also my own process. And I am guessing that this is all work that you have done for yourself.
Absolutely. And a work in progress. I don't necessarily believe that we are ever fully healed or that there's ever a destination point because, as we accumulate days and years on this planet, we are constantly exposed to new experiences, new relationships, and new opportunities that continue our journey of learning and self-awareness.
So true. There's always something out there that's teaching us a lesson if we have
Mhm.
our eyes open.
I was contacted by a former client interested in re-upping with me, and I had opened the door for her twice previously, and come to find out she was kind of waiting for a person of interest to kind of be on the scene before she renewed working with me. But of course, by that time, she's in a crisis situation and needed immediate help. And it's not my practice to be in service outside of an official agreement. And on top of that, I was on my way out of town to a family service, and things were kind of complex, and I wasn't able to drop everything and address her needs. And boy, that's hard for me because I mean, I do this work because I want to serve, and we have this standing relationship, and I'm very excited that there's a person of interest on her radar right now. But at the same time, like there literally was no opportunity for me to serve, not even sitting at the gate at the airport. Like, I was trying to figure out the hotel login so that I could do the contactless check-in. It just but of my experience of having to lay that boundary was just very complex. My husband actually he's asked me, like, are you okay? You look distressed. And I said to him, I was like, I'm okay. And maybe you're picking up on the distress in my face because I'm aware that I have to set a boundary and it's really uncomfortable for me. Like, everything's fine, but like there's this, I call it the butt pucker zone, and it shows up in a number of different circumstances. But for me, like, having to lay a boundary with somebody that I care about and with somebody that I really would love to meet their need, but I just can't because I have to prioritize myself in that circumstance, is very uncomfortable. But at the same time, the more we do these things, the more we practice them, I do feel as though there's a bit of an ease and a flow that can be developed. It may never be easy, but I do feel like the ability gets a little bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's another one of those situations where you want to serve her because that's a core need of yours to
Mhm.
be of service. And at the same time, that was not a good time for you. So by saying no to serving her at that time, you weren't saying no to ever serving her again. And I think that we often have trouble with that no because we're second guessing ourselves and we feel bad and we feel guilty. And that's where boundaries come in. Setting a kind boundary is really about protecting ourselves and our energies so that we don't overextend and end up regretting it. And this is really the topic for today because that people pleaser who wants to make everybody happy ends up being really inauthentic and drained and exhausted all the time. So tell us like what your people pleaser moment was, like that got you to do this work and really be able to set these boundaries because I know it's not easy.
I think it took me quite a bit of time in my life to really recognize that I have these pleasing tendencies, that verge on codependent tendencies. And I don't have a psychology background, so I don't use those clinical terms, but I know enough about codependency that my pleasing tendencies and many people's pleasing tendencies are similar to codependency. For our purposes today, we'll talk about pleasing. And it took me a while to first even recognize that that was like part of my vocabulary, part of my ways of being. And I don't think it was really until I had already attracted my life partner before I started really examining it, because it was coming up in my marriage, and which is, just a very potent example of how our patterns don't just simply vanish once we find the right person. I think that, the right person, quote unquote, is really just a symbol of the person that we may choose to go deeper into our own individual and collaborative work together around relational skills. For me, there's this person that is as committed to growth or growth mindset as I am, as committed to self-discovery as I am. So therefore, this is an appropriate partner. This is a wonderful partner for me to learn more about myself and more about my own relational skills with, in this seemingly like safe and loving container. But it wasn't until I had that, and these tendencies were kind of butting up against against the wall in that relationship, that I began to kind of look backward in hindsight and realize that, oh, this has been present all along. And there was an instance, I think, that it really came up on my radar. There was a time when my husband was traveling for work quite a bit, and we live in the Front Range of Colorado, and we're about a good 45-minute drive from our airport. And there was a time that I would drive my husband to the airport and pick him up, as, a loving wife that, wanted to spend time with him and make his life a little bit easier. And, and there were times that his itinerary would change and that he would leave a day later or arrive home a day earlier. And I remember so clearly, there was one night when I wasn't expecting him home for like another couple of days. And I had, just very lovingly planned a self-care night for myself. And I remember getting a text from him, "Hey, my plans have changed. I'm coming in tonight. Would you be able to pick me up from the airport?" Simple request, right? No emotional hooks, just, "Hey, are you available to pick me up?" I went into crisis. I was in absolute breakdown because, the war inside of me was saying, well, gosh, I really don't want to drive to the airport tonight. I really, I've planned this self-care night for myself, like, and I might just be sitting on the couch and watching Netflix, but still, like, that is a commitment that I've made to myself. While on the other hand, inside of me, there's this just paralyzing pull towards not disappointing and not inconveniencing. I narrowed it down to these two things that drive my personal pleasing patterns. And the more I speak with women and serve women in these tendencies, I find that there are other drivers, but these two pop up very frequently. They don't want to inconvenience their partner. They don't want to disappoint their partner. And, I can't say that I handled that situation that evening very well. But what it did do was that it sparked just this, just this rear view journey for me to reflect on, where have I said yes in the past when what I really meant was no. And it's interesting because I noticed that I would kind of go in and out of these patterns. I would be in the pleasing pattern in the context of relationship, but then there was one relationship where I was able to see clearly that my desire for commitment wasn't being met, and I was able to say no. I was able to say, this isn't actually what I really want. And I was able to draw that line and set that boundary and move on from that relationship. I call that my 80% relationship, because 80% of it was so great. But there was that 20% of commitment and committed intentionally, partnership that was missing. So I think for women who find themselves in pleasing patterns, it's important to recognize that these aren't 100% of the time. Like, we can't beat ourselves up for having these tendencies, because they're not at play all the time. But it is very important to recognize, like, when they are at play, and what are the pieces, the elements that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, wow. So I want to comment on a bunch of things. First of all, I think a lot of people feel they have to be so completely, healed in all ways before they get into a relationship. And as Bex illustrated so beautifully, that being in a safe partnership is the container to help you grow even more. And I had somebody tell me recently that the guy that she's with told her he demanded that she not play small. Like he demanded the best of her. And it was the
Hmm.
first time anyone ever took a stand for her not hiding, like, and not
Yeah.
hiding her power to make somebody else shine. And he was like, yes, this is not an option. Like, you need to go out there and be you. And I want that for you. And so it's in the right partnership. And I remember, even though my marriage was not great, I married a very creative comedian who I loved that part of him. And at one point, or pretty early on in our marriage, he gave it up. And I was devastated because I felt like a big part of him had died. And I wanted him to say yes to what lit him up again. And so he eventually went back to it. But I remember that feeling of like grief, that this is something you're giving up. And and it was out of, pain, and there was a lot going on for him, and he just didn't have the energy to put towards it. But it was what sparked him, and it was what made him come alive. And I think that we often don't even know what our yeses and nos are. I think, for a lot of people, they don't know where to start. So I think, you brought up the yeses and the nos. I definitely volunteered for every organization, and really, I said yes in the moment because it felt right. And then I was like, what did I get myself into? And so we often don't really process our yeses. We think, oh, wait, sometimes we say yes because we don't want to disappoint, like you said. So let's say a wedding. I used to say yes to most invitations. And then started picturing myself at the wedding and thinking, okay, I have to drive like 2 hours. Everybody's going to wear masks. It's not going to really be fun. I don't really like anybody there except maybe one person. Nope.
Yeah.
But you got to work through that to say, okay, let me see, what does that yes mean to me? And what am I giving up when I say yes, when I mean no? So if you can share some of the ways that you are able to really understand, like be aware of that people pleasing behavior, how to nip it in the bud, how to stop feeling bad about saying no,
Mhm.
to help our audience, I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this goes back to, the idea of a woman of value is a woman who is self-aware. And the awareness for me around my pleasing tendencies, things that I think about are, what may have been the origins, where did I perhaps pick this up or learn this pattern? And for me, it was my family of origin system. And so as an adult, I can recognize those tendencies are likely going to still be at play in that dynamic. So just a very, very recent experience in my own life. I traveled back east to a family service, and making arrangements with my mother and my brother, and on the phone, and God bless my mother again, doing the best that she can with the skills that she has. But I can hear her saying, oh, well, you can fly into X and X and you can stay here with us, and then we can all drive together. And I hear her planning out the whole weekend on my behalf. And while to some that might sound like, very, very loving and very supportive and helpful, what I know from my family dynamic and system, I'm hearing that she's orchestrating this to benefit her own needs and desires for connection without expressing her needs and desires for connection. And so, just recognizing that those systems are in play in our, wherever we may have learned these patterns, and recognizing that when I'm starting to feel as though my future is being orchestrated or my reality is being controlled, I can feel it in a sensory capacity first. I feel sort of a tightness in my chest and a little bit of heat in my face. So I start paying attention to those sensory cues. And then I often tell my clients that our frustration, our anger, our eye roll, all of those moments are opportunities. Those are all doorways letting us know that our own needs and desires are being butt up against, you know. And so I try to pay attention to that. I try to teach my clients through mindfulness practices that those are all moments to pay attention to. Those are moments of opportunity to use our words to express. Actually, I think that what works best for me is I'll fly into such and such, and then from there I'll get a hotel room and I'll meet up with you the next day. And letting them know, like, this is what works for me.
This is great because recognizing the patterns. So we want to kind of connect the dots. Where did it come
Mhm.
from? Most of the time
Yeah.
it's family of origin. It's how we were raised. And I would say that all of my clients were raised by people pleasing parents or parents who were so neglectful that they became people pleasers just to be seen and get a pat on the back because they weren't recognized otherwise.
Mhm.
And I think the getting into your body part, feeling the sensory cues that come up is so important. And any behavior you want to change, we
Yeah.
have responses in our bodies and we totally don't tune into those most of the time.
Mhm.
So pay attention to the frustration and the anger and the eye rolling, because even I was telling you before we started when we had this master class last night, and it was very triggering for the women in the group, and a lot of anger came up. And I said I appreciated that anger came up because these women realized that something important to them was being butted up against, being stepped
Mhm.
on. So paying attention and being able to then speak up. So you used one of my favorite boundary scripts was what works best for me is. I think often when people set a boundary, they just say, no, that
Right.
doesn't work. And they don't say, but this does. And
Mhm.
so I often, and I have the same mother as you, I think. We have to check our genetics later. But my mother likes to control the situation and she thinks she knows what's best for everybody. And
Mhm.
and I've asked her to please check in with me before she tells me how she's going to fix me or assumes that I am having a problem I'm not even having. Like, oh
Right.
my God, Mom, you're wasting so much energy trying to figure out what the problem is when you could just ask me. So it's being able to have humor helps also.
Mhm.
But often I will also just add that I appreciate that you're trying to help. And what works best for me is because I think a lot of times when people are in that mode and they're so unaware, they are trying to help. They just don't
Yes.
realize that they're so far off base because they haven't checked in and it's really about them and not about us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I love that you kind of touch base on the physical cues, and then because I believe in my experience and my studies is that the physical cues are even present before the emotional cues, and I just feel like so many of us are so disconnected from our emotions if if we've come up in a certain set of circumstances in our family of origin, or if we're in these pleasing tendencies, chances are we're just really disconnected from what's really going on inside. um, I had a conversation with another client who was talking about a workplace situation, and this client is very busy and very thoroughly planned, and is very into structured systems, and so has a colleague that when she walks by, the colleague is trying to get her attention. Oh, hey, I have something to share with you. Hey, could I run this by you? And my client just immediately is frustrated, annoyed, eye roll energy, like, this person is distracting her, wasting her time, out to get her in some way, and she has this complete assumption, from where the colleague is coming from, versus just shifting her attention back on herself. And this is where I believe mindfulness is so powerful, slowing the moment down, because there, through mindfulness practices and through repetition and um, just training our brain, training our focus and our attention, we have the capacity to pause and create this sacred window of choice. How are we going to respond? Are we going to fly off the handle, blame our colleague for ruining our day? Or are we gonna be able to pause, take a breath, and maybe just have a gut check? Is my colleague being actively malicious? Is my colleague out to ruin my life? Is my colleague out to ruin my day? Or is it possible that we have different operating systems? That when I walk by, then I'm suddenly on her radar, suddenly on her awareness, and she has something to share with me, but she didn't think about it until she saw me. Maybe we just operate in different ways. That frustration, that annoyance, again, coming back to the emotional cues, I feel like are so very important for us to reflect on and build that self-awareness around, because again, those are just magnificent doorways to create connection, perhaps through laying a boundary, like, hey, I understand that you want to get my attention. I understand that you want my input on this. What works best for me is maybe we have a 15-minute sync meeting that we schedule right after lunch. That would really work well for me. And that way you can bring all of your questions to me and all of your, sounding board ideas, and that would really work well for my schedule. And that's an opportunity for her to create a boundary in her professional life. And as we build those skills, that just only benefits all of the relationships that we have, whether they be familial or romantic. We build that muscle of recognizing when we're, when our own boundaries are being crossed, when we're led to, or when those complex emotions arise. It's a golden doorway.
That's a great example too, I think. And those kinds of things happen all the time, where we assume that somebody is doing something or meaning something, and we don't know at all how they think. And I have a daughter with ADD, and I used to see her as processing the same way I do. And I would get really mad at her because she wouldn't put things away, and she'd leave the door open, and she would talk back to me. She was very reactive, and those are all signs of ADD. And the way that got me to really shift how I saw her and have more empathy for her was having a coach help me step into my daughter's shoes and see me and our situation through her eyes, and realized that she wasn't doing things because she was out to get me. And what was interesting was she's now 26, almost 27, and she's living in California. She picked up and moved, and she's doing a lot of brave, courageous things. I'm so proud of her. And she was having some roommate issues, and they were very similar to the issues she had with me. And so she said, wow, Mom, I realized, first of all, that I was pretty hard to live with. I said, yeah, that's true. And she said, well, she's so annoying and she's so unclear, and she thinks I can read her mind, and she's so much older than I am. She should know by now all these things. Why does she? So I said, would you like my feedback? Because I don't offer unsolicited advice, because that's a boundary crossing. And
Yeah.
so she goes, yeah. And I said, well, can I tell you how I didn't kill you when you were living with me? She goes, yeah. I said, well, first of all, I got to see you from your point of view, not mine. And I said, so if you keep thinking that she should know, and how dare she, and why didn't she, then you're always going to be angry. But if you can use your skills of being able to speak up clearly and calmly and come up with a solution together, you're going to probably see a very big change. And that's what happened. But it was like it came full circle. And I didn't do what like my mother might have done, which is, I told you so. See, you deserve what you got because you did it to me. So yeah, I think it's just, we just don't know where our life lessons are going to take us, how they're going to impact other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is just, it shows up all day, every day. Honestly, when you become in tune to boundaries, communication skills, and it's stopping the living your life in accommodation to someone else.
Hmm.
Wow, it's like you free up all this time. The cost of not doing that is just so high.
Yeah.
So yeah, So you've shared some great ways of shifting the attention back on yourself, and I think slowing the moment down. Do you have any mindfulness tools that you can share with us? Because I agree that just getting present in the moment, because that takes you out of future focusing and past beat up wherever, always never kind of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I have a number of tools. I mean, first and foremost, hands down, I would say mindfulness meditation is one of my number one tools, and a practice that I offer all of the women that I work with. And whatever your relationship with meditation is, um, there's something to be said about a particular form of mindfulness meditation where it doesn't require you to sit in perfect silence for hours at a time, trying to erase your mind of thought completely. But rather, I feel like there's a lot of potency in 10-minute segments, even one 10-minute segment daily. There's a lot of power in repetition. And the purpose of that sit, again, is not to eliminate all thought, and it's not even to entertain each thought that comes up and examine each thought. I mean, that's kind of next level stuff. At the very entry point of mindfulness meditation, from my perspective and through the study that I've done with this, is recognizing that everything that arises is simply a, a point of our consciousness, like an element on. I like to think of our consciousness as sort of like a whiteboard or a cork board, right? And if we're seated and maybe we hear the toilet running, as I often do in my seated meditation, or I get a whiff of the candle that I'm burning. These are all inputs on the spectrum of consciousness. They're like little push pins on that cork board of consciousness. And we could take that theory one step further, in that the thought that we just had, oh, I'm thinking about what I'm going to wear today or what I'm going to have for breakfast. That's another pinpoint on my corkboard of consciousness. And when those thoughts arise, I'm not even trying to entertain them or follow the thread. I'm just recognizing, oh, I had a planning thought, and I say thank you, and then I let it move on. And I just recognize, oh wow, my brain's really active this morning. Similarly, the emotions that we feel, again, are other pinpoints, push pins on this corkboard of consciousness. I like to consider that our emotions are, they may not feel good, they're uncomfortable, some of them, but they're not, they don't last, they're temporary. And if they're ripe with information or opportunity, then yeah, we could look at them as just other, data points on this spectrum of consciousness. So all of that is to say is that, this 10-minute seated meditation is really just an opportunity to witness what's happening in the present moment. And I believe, I mean, from my own experience, from the experience of my clients, that with repeated practice of these things, we're able to catch emotions as they arise instead of after we've had an emotional outburst, or we're able to catch the physical sensations as they are present versus in hindsight and reflection. Now, hindsight reflection is a wonderful thing. And as we're building these skills, I think hindsight reflection is a powerful tool in unwinding past meltdowns or breakdowns or whatnot. But beyond seated meditation, these 10 minutes at a time, mindfulness work, I find that it's going to kind of sound funny, but as a mover and a dancer, anytime I'm in motion, whether that be in a stable, I'll explain in a second, whether that be in a stable circumstance or an unstable circumstance, motion and movement gives me present moment access. And when I say unstable circumstances, I'm just talking about my more recent, I don't know, my more recent affections for wheels. And so I picked up skating, I picked up roller skating, I picked up ice skating, and I picked up this electronic skateboard called a one wheel. All of these things put me at risk for injury and for catastrophic harm. And so for me to engage with these activities, I be present in the moment. I can't be multitasking. I can't be thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner, or, what airline I'm going to fly on my next trip, or whatever. So for people listening who may have complex relationships with seated meditation, or may have resistance to that, there are so many alternatives to seated meditation to access present moment awareness, to flex those muscles and be in repetition. And it doesn't have to be as extreme as roller skating or electric skateboarding, but I do feel as though there are certain specific doorways that help us present moment awareness, and that is breath, laughter, touch, and movement. Anything involving our five senses. These are all, I would say, pathways to feminine energy, or pathways to present moment awareness that, help us get out of our thinking mode and getting into our being mode, our receptivity, our just our awareness of what is in the moment, so that we're able to form words and communicate around these things, or we're at least present to what's happening right here in front of us, versus, again, that hindsight reflection is very powerful, but ideally we're building the muscles so that we have this awareness in the moment. We can contribute to amending conversation in the moment versus 2 days later, or circumstances like that.
Yeah, these are all great, because I think a lot of people really struggle with meditation, me included, because it
Hmm.
feels like I have to quiet my thoughts, and I never quiet my thoughts.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really hard, especially I have a really active mind. And I think a lot of people do. And one of the things I learned was I do best with anything that involves any of the senses. So if I'm outdoors and I'm listening for sounds near and far, if I'm staring at a painting and I'm letting my eyes kind of get out of focus and then in focus, it just helps me to stay present. I took a course in positive intelligence, and basically they used a lot of the same tools that I learned in my coaching courses, but it focused on getting out of saboteur and getting into our, what he calls the sage self. And the sage,
Hmm.
the higher self, is accessed through inner child work and this kind of mindfulness. And he developed an app that has you be mindful like 3 times a day.
Hmm.
And there's different time frames that you can do for a minute, for 2 minutes, and he calls them PQ reps, positive intelligent reps. And so some of them are just touch your first finger to your thumb and
Hmm.
do that 5 times, or
Yeah.
touch each finger, make sure your feet are planted, feel the earth beneath you. All of these things for people who feel that meditation is beyond them and I can't quiet my thoughts. I think these are great. And I know that you're big into movement. So some people, that will resonate for them too. They would love to get up and dance and do things in the morning to get them going and feel that they're in their bodies, as opposed to the clients I have who get into email first thing in the morning. And I'm like, no,
Right.
no, no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tuck your phone into bed in another room, and give yourself at least
Yeah.
30 minutes before touching it.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
people don't realize the harm they're doing to themselves when they haven't even given themselves time to give back and replenish before you even start your day. Because
yeah.
as soon as you're on email, you're already giving to other people. You're answering
Right.
other people. You're saying yes to other people. You're not saying no. And, it's the same with, the companies that ask people to respond on the weekends. I remember somebody telling me, I'm so angry because she's, messaging me all times of day and night, my boss. She works in an urgent type of business where some of this stuff could be important. So she had to
Mhm.
differentiate with her boss. If something really is important and is an emergency, you have to write that, because
Yeah.
otherwise I'm not opening your text. And
Yeah.
that's a boundary. Otherwise, like, why did I open this? And now I'm ruining my weekend.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that you referenced the positive intelligence course. My husband and I actually did that over the winter,
Ah,
so I'm very
okay.
familiar with the sabotages and the saboteurs and the sage and the PQ reps.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I do find, and I think that for me, a lot of my own mindfulness practices do involve the body, whether that be breath work or other movement, dance, or the the activities where I could be in catastrophic harm if I take my focus away.
Yeah, right. I
This is
would
an extreme
fall
example.
down, right?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So, Bex, tell us a little bit about what you're doing in the present, your programs, like how you're taking all of this beautiful knowledge and what you're doing with it.
Yeah, wonderful. So, my work is focused on helping independent women attract and grow lasting, loving relationships without sacrificing who they are or what they want out of life. So, the women that I work with are either single, looking for partnership, or they're in partnership, wanting to um, really reclaim themselves, women who have sort of exiled the very best parts of themselves or who have um, neglected their own needs in service of the relationship or prioritizing their partner ahead of themselves. And we do this whether a woman is single or partnered. We do a lot of the same work, and it's very focused around reflection of our own personal experience. We do a lot of hindsight reflection because that's our history is ripe with information. In order to dig into the past and reflect on the past, we have to approach it with a sense of self-compassion and non-judgment. So we do a lot of work around reframing the history and telling a new story around not trying to wash the past or absolve us of our own mistakes or failures or poor choices, but to see those experiences as fuel and fodder for where we are today and as learning experiences. I personally am a self-punisher from way back, taking full responsibility for all the crap in the world. And it's really important to recognize that when relationships have dissolved or when there's conflict, it's generally not a one-way street. And so some of the work that we do is finding differentiating, as we were talking about earlier, differentiating what was my responsibility and what was my partner's responsibility. How did maybe I want my partner to show up differently? How would I show up differently in the future, moving forward, knowing now what I didn't know then? We work a lot around, building that muscle that helps us create that sacred pause, that window of choice, so that we can respond to conflict in a loving, connected way versus in a way that creates more division and prolongs the conflict. We do a lot of work around emotional mastery and emotional regulation, not saying emotional control, because we don't want to control our emotions, but we want to understand them. We want to be able to experience them fully and move through them in a skillful way where we're gleaning information and integrating that information into our relationships moving forward, expressing our needs, expressing our desires, expressing boundaries in skillful ways that again actually create more connection than division or prolonging conflict. And of course, beyond all of that self-awareness and self-reflection work, we also we play in the tactical of online and in real life dating and connecting with men in an authentic way, flirting in a way that doesn't feel desperate or awkward, but in a in a way that you would connect with almost anybody. And bottom line, I think that what separates me from other professionals in this field is really focusing on having fun with all of it and not taking ourselves too seriously, not taking the engagement with different potential partners, candidates too seriously, so that when things don't work out as we may have wanted them to, it doesn't cause a downward spiral where we're pulling ourselves off the dating dance floor and just rejecting love altogether, and then kicking the can down the road for a couple of years and then saying, wow, I really do want this and maybe I'll try again. But integrating the tools of fun and playfulness and non-attachment and not taking ourselves so seriously, so that it's a a consistent practice that continues to nourish us, instead of a practice that feels like work or something that we have to endure to have the relationship that we so desire.
Yeah, this is, I mean, this deep work is essential in my opinion. And it sounds like you do really go deep, and it's also fun, which I think a lot of people don't realize it can be both. I think that learning the tools so that you can check yourself and then you can trust yourself, and you don't see dating or relationships as work, or do you think it's possible for me? I don't think I could ever have that. That's a real big fear for a lot of people. I
Mhm.
also love that you brought up non-attachment. I've been talking about that a lot because we attach so strongly to people we barely know. And then we have expectations around those people, and it's just a killer
Yeah.
because we're constantly disappointed and then we give up and we're burnt out. We just go in. And this kind of goes back to the beginning of this conversation where you have an expectation, you haven't really checked in with yourself, you don't really know this person. And
Right.
or you talked about the 80% relationship. When people have that 80% relationship and they really want it to work, but 20% is missing. I have somebody who's calling me right after we finish here who has an 80% relationship, and there are some really big things that are missing. And we need to have a heart to heart about that. You can't force something that's not there to be there, and especially if it's a red flag. If
Yeah.
that person is unkind to other people, maybe not to you, but talks badly about coworkers or his family and feels like a victim, that's a really hard thing to navigate around. And how are you
Yeah.
going to, make a relationship work with somebody who doesn't have any awareness around that? So
Mhm.
we need to learn to check ourselves. And it's one of the hardest things we do, having relationships. It makes you have to look at yourself really honestly. And really, it's hard. It's hard because what most people are attracted to is unhealthy,
Mhm.
not sustainable, or it's something that we learn to give up big parts of ourselves for no reason.
Mhm.
And I think so many of the books and the teachings out there are about being fake and manipulative, and don't ever say this, don't ever do that, and always do this. And ugh, there are no one size fits all packages out
Mm.
there.
Yeah, for absolute truth.
Oh, all right. So, what is the future plan for the Bex coaching industry here?
Well, the future, I one of the things that lights me up and really fills my heart is gathering women together in unique circumstances. And as you mentioned when you read my bio, two of the things that I absolutely adore creating are immersive glamping experiences and spectacle dance performances. And, these two are kind of at the opposite ends of the spectrum as far as experiences. One is, out in a semi-wilderness environment with creature comforts, of course, which in some way like helps us strip away all of the distractions and electricity of everyday life, and helps us kind of slow down time and really get connected with things on a deeper level. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, these spectacle dance performances, one of them that I absolutely love to do is the New York City Dance Parade. Even though I live in Colorado, I love me a parade. And I mean, I'm a Leo, and at heart, I absolutely love to dress up and dance, um, and I know that there are tons of women that love that too, and really don't necessarily have that opportunity to, not take themselves so seriously, and just have such a fun and out of the ordinary experience. I feel as though those experiences give women an opportunity to connect with themselves in a way that regular ordinary life doesn't. And so for the future, my hope is, pending our global situation, is that I'm able to bring these in-person experiences back to the table and offer them up to the public, because they are transformational and just having, working with women live in person is, again, just a deep treasure of mine. And so we'll see what 2022 has in store.
They sound incredible. And I think it is so important to let go, to be in our bodies. We're back to that theme.
Hmm.
And when I've had a few retreats, and I would invite in a friend of mine who's a dancer to do a workshop with them and bring scarves and just let them be free. I do that
Hmm.
with art also with my clients when I used to do these art workshops in person. So I would love to get back to that because it's really about just being like a kid again. And
Yeah.
we lose so much of the essence of who we are because we're trying to please people. All
Indeed.
right, so are you ready for the lightning round?
Oh, I believe so. Bring it.
Okay, put your seatbelt on. We're going to go fast.
Okay.
All right, first one is fill in the blank. I used to think I wasn't blank enough.
I used to think that I wasn't good enough, fit enough, thin enough. Let's just say it. I used to think I wasn't thin enough.
Ah, a lot of enoughs. What was the number one thing holding you back from becoming a woman of value?
The number one thing holding me back from becoming a woman of value was my need to please other people and ease other people's discomfort ahead of addressing my own needs.
What is the best advice you can give to a woman who wants to become more empowered?
Ooh, the best advice that I could give to a woman who wants to be more empowered is to know thyself. And to know thyself, we can't do it in a vacuum. To find the helping professionals that can help us unearth the deeper, more vulnerable hidden truths that we have that drive our behaviors and drive our ways of thinking and showing up in the world that may not be serving us.
Amen, sister.
I have a whole support team that I wouldn't be the woman that I am today without therapists and coaches and acupuncturists and nutritionists. And I'm just, yeah.
It's so true. We need a community of people, it takes a village.
Hmm.
And what makes me so happy is when my children reach out for help and I see that they're finally getting it, like one of my children who's been very resistant to therapy is finally going to therapy and she said, I realize I don't really know who I am because she's got kids and she's kind of become the mom and the wife and she's the most creative, amazing person. But she said, if my 2-year-old went to school tomorrow, I don't know who I'd be. And I said, well,
Wow.
I'm so glad that you're in that conversation with yourself and with your therapist, because that's going to lead you to a really great discovery.
Hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. What advice would you give to your younger self?
The advice that I would give to my younger self is be gentle. Be gentle. Nobody's perfect. Life is one giant learning curve, and everything is practice, and there's no destination. So be gentle. Be gentle with yourself.
That's great advice. So we all need to hear because you mentioned the other word that goes in the codependency bucket, which is perfectionism. Trying to be
I don't know
perfect.
anything about that.
Right, I could tell. Oh my God, that held me back from taking so many risks, from really showing up because I was afraid of being judged so much for not being perfect.
Yeah.
There is no perfect, spoiler alert. What is something that people often get wrong about you?
Oh, wow. What an interesting question. Something that people often get wrong about me is that my relationship is free from conflict or struggle. I try to be very open and honest about that, actually, that it is not, it's not free from conflict. Because I mean, I don't want to say that I don't believe in relationship free from conflict, though I'm not one to make extreme claims. So I would love to believe that there's relationship free from conflict, but then again, I don't believe that relationship is defined by conflict. I don't necessarily believe that simply because a relationship experiences conflict means that it's good or bad, or it's bound for any certain destination or outcome. But rather, I really feel like the ways in which we overcome conflict have more of an impact on the relationship itself, the flavor of the relationship, and the longevity capacity of the relationship. So yeah, I'm not free from conflict. My relationship isn't perfect. And I do hear sometimes that like people so surprised that my husband and I had an argument, or we had a blow up, or a meltdown. And it's like, well, we're human, having a human experience and doing the work just like you.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually get very triggered when people tell me, men have told me this on a first date. Men who have lost their wives have said, "Oh, we had perfect marriage. We never fought." And I'm like, did you have honest conversations? Did you actually share things that mattered with each other? Because any healthy relationship has conflict if you're really being honest. And it's how you deal with conflict that matters. It's not whether you have it or not. And I mean, John Gottman's work around what makes for a successful relationship has to do with conflict resolution.
Yeah.
You can tell that that a relationship is not going to work when there's contempt and criticism and defensiveness and stonewalling.
Mm-hmm.
That's I'm right, you're wrong thinking. And that doesn't work. But when you're both trying to be compassionate and have worked through whatever it is on your end and have that self-awareness, and then come together and say, I want to get closer to you, not further apart. Like, that's the goal here. It's not just to give you a piece of my mind, it's to
Yeah.
actually get more intimate and close. And the only way we can do that is to really talk things through. And I
Mhm.
think people don't know how to do it. And so
Yeah.
they avoid it. And then you get the imploding and the people pleasing and the stuffing. And then you start fighting about things that don't matter at all, because you're not really
Mhm.
talking about the issues. So
Right.
the butter left out on the counter is the giant issue, when it's really not.
Right. It's nothing to do with the butter.
Not anything to do with the butter. That's what we're going to call
Right.
this episode. It has nothing to do with the butter. No.
Right.
All right. Well, Bex, this is just an incredible conversation. I could go on forever, but we are going to end, since it is a podcast and not a week-long episode. My final question for you is, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh my goodness. What another wonderful question. How would I like to be remembered? Ah, the thing that comes to my mind is something that came up for me in my skating journey, learning to be a ice skater, roller skater as an adult, and falling many times, and kind of laughing about it because it's fun, it's funny, and I try not to take myself too seriously. But there's this term that came through for me in that process: joyful humility. And I think I would love to be remembered, or at least I would love to see myself as one who is joyfully humble, who doesn't take myself too seriously, who brings an element of joy, but also is, in a role of service, and helping others in that capacity of not taking themselves too seriously and being joyfully humble.
That is a lovely sentiment, and you're living it. So it's always nice when you're living your legacy, really. And
Yeah.
that's how you know you're tapping into your truth. If you can share a little bit about how you can be found, I will have that in the show notes as well. But if you can share your website and some of your social media accounts, that'd be great.
Yeah, happily. My website is bexburtoncoaching.com. And there is a gift on there for anybody who would like to go deeper into Bexico, as I fondly call it. I'm on Instagram as Love Coach Bex, and on YouTube as Bex Burton Coaching. And Bex is BEX, like T-Rex.
If you would like to step more fully into your value, grab a free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Becoming a Woman of Value on my website, thewomanofvalue.com. Just click the link at the top of the homepage. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to click the subscribe button in your listening app. And if there's something in this episode that inspired you, please share it with others, because the more we share these inspirational stories, the more women of value we will have in this world. I'll see you next time.